In a world where empires refuse to die and nations fight for their very existence. Welcome to Erased Empires. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical conflicts of our time, the war between Ukraine and Russia. A 1,000-year story of brotherhood turned to bloodshed. Of freedom versus control. Of a people who chose to stand, no matter the cost. If you want the full story, the truth behind the headlines, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because at Erased Empires, we bring you the stories they tried to bury, the nations they wanted to erase, the truth that refuses to die. Subscribe now. Let's uncover history together. This is Erased Empires, where forgotten nations rise again. Now let's begin. They were once one people, bound by empire, language, and memory. But somewhere along the centuries, that bond cracked, and from its ashes rose two nations destined to collide. To understand why tanks roll through Ukrainian streets today, why cities burn and families flee, we must journey back through time. Back to when the story was different. Back to when the blood spilled now once flowed through shared veins. This is not just a war. It is the violent conclusion of a 1,000-year argument. An argument about identity, about freedom, about who gets to decide a nation's fate. Long before Russia or Ukraine existed, there was Kievan Rus, a medieval realm that gave birth to both. Today, each claims that legacy as their own, a 1,000-year-old argument that still fuels pride and pain. Picture the year 882. Viking traders and Slavic tribes forge a kingdom along the Dnieper River. Its heart beats in Kiev, a city of gold-domed churches and bustling markets. Kievan Rus becomes a bridge between Europe and Asia, powerful and prosperous. Both Russians and Ukrainians trace their roots to this medieval state. But here lies the first seed of conflict. Russia claims Kievan Rus as the beginning of Russian civilization. Ukraine says, no, Kiev was ours first. Moscow came later, built in forests far to the north. This ancient rivalry matters because leaders use history as a weapon. When Moscow claims Ukraine is not a real nation, they point to Kievan Rus and say, we were always one. When Ukraine fights for independence, they point to that same kingdom and say, Kiev was a great capital when Moscow was nothing but woods. Poland, Lithuania, the Tsars, the land between them was conquered again and again. Ukraine learned to survive by remembering who it was, even when others ruled its soil. By the 1300s, Kievan Rus fragments. Mongol hordes sweep through, burning everything. In the chaos, Ukrainian lands are carved up. Poland takes the west. Lithuania grabs the center. Later, the Russian Empire absorbs the east. For centuries, Ukraine exists under foreign rule. Its language banned in schools. Its culture suppressed. Its people scattered between empires. But something survives. Songs. Stories. A stubborn memory that whispers, we are not them. The Cossacks rise. Fierce warrior communities defending Ukrainian lands. They become symbols of resistance, of a people who refuse to be erased. Even when empires crush their revolts, the legend endures. This pattern repeats through history. Conquest, resistance, survival. Ukraine learns that independence is not given. It must be fought for, again and again. In 1922, the Soviet Union rose, promising equality, unity, and strength. Ukraine joined not by choice but by force. Its culture folded into a greater empire that spoke with one voice, Moscow's. The Russian Empire collapses in 1917. For a brief moment, Ukraine declares independence. Hope blooms like spring after a long winter. A new nation emerges with its own government, its own currency, its own dreams. But the dream dies quickly. The Bolsheviks, building their communist utopia, march westward. Ukraine resists. A brutal civil war follows. In the end, Soviet armies prevail. By 1922, Ukraine becomes a founding republic of the Soviet Union. On paper, Ukraine has autonomy. In reality, Moscow controls everything. Decisions about factories, farms, schools, all made in the Kremlin. Ukrainian communists, who speak too loudly about independence, disappear in the night. The Soviet promise was unity. The reality was empire with a new face. And the Ukrainian language, once again, becomes suspect. Speaking it too proudly marks you as a nationalist, an enemy of the people. In the 1930s, Stalin's policies brought famine, the Holodomor. Millions of Ukrainians starved while grain was shipped abroad. That memory became a scar, a quiet rage that never healed. Asterisk. What happened next is horror almost beyond words. Stalin demands rapid industrialization. He orders the collectivization of farms, peasants forced to give up their land. Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, resists. Stalin's response is calculated cruelty. He seizes grain by force. Every kernel. Soldiers search homes, confiscate food, seal borders so no one can escape. Between 1932 and 1933, somewhere between 3 and 5 million Ukrainians starved to death. People eat grass. They eat tree bark. Families watch their children waste away, unable to help. Bodies lie in streets. Villages fall silent, entire populations erased. And through it all, trains carry Ukrainian grain to other Soviet republics and abroad. The world barely notices. The Soviet Union denies it is happening. Ukrainians call it the Holodomor, death by hunger. Many historians call it genocide. Moscow, for decades, refuses even to acknowledge it happened. This wound never closes. Even today, when Ukrainians speak of Russian rule, they remember the Holodomor. They remember being left to die while others prospered from their stolen harvest. World War II united them again under Soviet flags. Together they defeated Nazi Germany, but victory brought new chains, not freedom. Asterisk. June 1941. Nazi Germany invades the Soviet Union. Ukraine becomes a battlefield. Cities reduced to rubble. Millions killed, soldiers and civilians alike. Some Ukrainians, desperate to escape Soviet tyranny, initially welcomed the Germans as liberators. That hope dies quickly under Nazi occupation. By 1944, Soviet forces pushed the Germans back. The war ends in 1945 with victory. Soviet soldiers plant their flag over the Reichstag in Berlin. Ukraine's contribution to that victory is immense. Millions of Ukrainian soldiers fought and died. But liberation from the Nazis does not mean freedom. Stalin tightens his grip. Anyone suspected of collaborating with Germans is executed or sent to gulags. Ukrainian nationalist movements crushed. The Iron Curtain descends. For the next 40 years, Ukraine remains locked inside the Soviet system. On the surface, peace. Beneath, resentment simmers. The Soviet Union collapsed like a dying star. 15 new nations were born. Among them, Ukraine, free for the first time in generations. Asterisk. By the 1980s, cracks appear in the Soviet facade. The economy stagnates. Chernobyl explodes in 1986, and Moscow tries to hide the truth, but the radiation does not lie. Trust crumbles. Mikhail Gorbachev introduces reforms, glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring. But once you open the door even slightly, people rush through. In 1991, a failed coup in Moscow accelerates the collapse. One by one, Soviet republics declare independence. On August 24, 1991, Ukraine's parliament votes for independence. In December, over 90% of Ukrainians vote yes in a referendum. The Soviet Union dies. On December 26, 1991, it officially ceases to exist. Ukraine is reborn, a nation once again after centuries of foreign rule. In Kiev, people celebrate. Blue and yellow flags wave from windows. Independence Square fills with hope. Finally, freedom. Finally, the chance to decide their own future. But freedom comes with a price. And the struggle is far from over. The new Ukraine was poor, uncertain, and fragile. Corruption spread, politicians argued, and yet hope grew, a hope to join the free world. Independence is one thing. Building a functioning country is another. The Soviet economy collapses, and Ukraine inherits chaos. Factories shut down. Savings evaporate in hyperinflation. Corruption spreads like disease through the new government. Oligarchs rise, men who seize state assets and become billionaires overnight, while ordinary people struggle to eat. Democracy exists on paper, but power remains concentrated in wealthy hands. The west and east of Ukraine begin to pull in different directions. Western Ukraine, with its history under Poland and Austria-Hungary, looks toward Europe. Eastern Ukraine, more industrialized and Russian-speaking, maintains closer ties to Moscow. Yet despite the struggles, something grows. A generation that does not remember Soviet rule. Young people who travel to Poland, to Germany, who taste freedom and want more. They see their neighbors in Central Europe joining the European Union, joining NATO, growing prosperous. They ask, why not us? Why should Ukraine remain trapped between past and future? In Moscow, many saw the Soviet collapse as humiliation. The dream of empire lived on, whispered through the Kremlin halls. Ukraine must not drift away. While Ukraine struggles to find its footing, Russia undergoes its own painful transformation. The 1990s bring economic collapse, chaos, and a sense of profound loss. For Russians, the Soviet Union was not just a political system. It was a superpower. It was pride. Its collapse feels like humiliation. A great nation reduced, its borders shrunk, its influence diminished. Vladimir Putin rises to power in 1999, promising to restore Russian greatness. He looks at the map and sees former Soviet republics slipping away. Some joining NATO. Some turning toward Europe. And Ukraine, the jewel in the imperial crown, also drifting westward. In Putin's speeches, a narrative forms. The Soviet collapse was a catastrophe. Russia is a civilization, not just a country. And Ukraine is not truly separate. It is Little Russia, part of the Russian world. This thinking is not new. It echoes centuries of Russian imperialism that denied Ukrainian identity. But now it comes wrapped in modern language, protecting Russian speakers, opposing NATO expansion, defending Russian interests. The message is clear. Ukraine may be independent on paper, but Moscow still considers it within Russia's sphere of influence. And any attempt to leave that sphere will not be tolerated. As NATO expanded eastward, Russia watched uneasily. Each new member felt like a fortress built closer to its borders. The question was simple: would Ukraine be next? After the Cold War, NATO does not dissolve. Instead, it expands. Poland joins in 1999. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, follow in 2004. Former Warsaw Pact members rush to join the Western Alliance, seeking protection from potential Russian aggression. Moscow protests loudly. NATO expansion breaks promises made during German reunification, they claim. Each new member is a threat. But the expansion continues. Why do these countries want NATO protection? Because they remember Soviet occupation. They fear Russian power. NATO membership means security. An attack on one is an attack on all. Ukraine watches this carefully. If NATO can protect the Baltics, could it protect Ukraine? Should Ukraine seek membership? Russia draws a red line. Ukraine joining NATO is unacceptable. It would bring Western military infrastructure to Russia's doorstep. Moscow will do anything to prevent it. The stage is set for confrontation. Ukraine's desire for Western integration clashes directly with Russia's determination to maintain influence. In 2004, Ukrainians flooded the streets in protest. The Orange Revolution toppled a corrupt government. Moscow's influence slipped further, and resentment grew. The 2004 presidential election becomes a turning point. Viktor Yanukovych, backed by Moscow, faces Viktor Yushchenko, who promises closer ties with Europe. The election is rigged. Yanukovych declared the winner despite clear fraud. But Ukrainians refuse to accept it. Hundreds of thousands pour into Independence Square in Kiev. They wear orange, Yushchenko's campaign color. They camp in freezing temperatures. They demand their voices be heard. International pressure builds. The Supreme Court orders a revote. This time, Yushchenko wins. The Orange Revolution succeeds. Democracy prevails. In Kiev, euphoria. In Moscow, alarm. Ukraine has just proven it can reject Russian influence through popular protest. The Kremlin watches and learns. And plans. The Orange Revolution inspires hope across the former Soviet space. If Ukrainians can overthrow a corrupt, Russia-backed government, maybe others can too. Georgia's Rose Revolution already showed it was possible. Are more revolutions coming? For Putin, these color revolutions look like Western-backed coups designed to surround Russia with hostile governments. His paranoia grows. His determination to stop Ukraine's Western drift hardens. By 2013, Ukraine faced a choice: sign a deal with the European Union, or turn back toward Russia. The president chose Moscow. The people chose Europe. The streets erupted, Nearly a decade passes. The Orange Revolution's promise fades. Corruption persists. In 2010, Yanukovych returns to power through legitimate elections. He promises to balance between Russia and Europe. By 2013, Ukraine prepares to sign an association agreement with the European Union. Not full membership, but a major step toward integration. People believe this is their chance for reform, for prosperity, for a European future. Then, in November, Yanukovych suddenly backs out. Under intense pressure from Moscow, threats of trade sanctions, promises of financial aid, he chooses Russia instead. The reaction is immediate. Students gather in Kiev's Independence Square to protest. They are peaceful, hopeful, waving European Union flags. They call their movement Euromaidan, Euro for Europe, Maidan for the square. At first, the protests are small. Then riot police violently disperse the students. Brutal images spread across social media. Outrage explodes. The next day, hundreds of thousands fill the square. What began as a protest about a trade agreement becomes something much larger. It becomes a fight for Ukraine's future. For dignity. For the right to choose their own path. In the winter of 2014, Kiev burned with protest. Barricades, smoke, songs, and tears. Dozens died fighting for a dream, to break free of Russian control. The Maidan protests last for months. Through bitter winter cold, people camp in the square. They build barricades from ice and cobblestones. They organize kitchens, medical stations, even a library. Yanukovych tries everything to break them. First police violence. Then anti-protest laws. Then negotiations that lead nowhere. The protesters refuse to leave. They sing the national anthem every hour. They demand Yanukovych's resignation and early elections. In February 2014, the situation explodes. Snipers open fire on protesters. Blood stains the snow. Over 100 people die in just a few days. The world watches in horror as a European capital becomes a war zone. The victims become known as the Heavenly Hundred. Their photos line the square, young and old, students and workers. They died for a simple belief that Ukraine should be free. Finally, on February 22nd, Yanukovych flees to Russia. The Maidan has won. But the price is terrible, and the consequences will be even worse. When the president fled to Russia, it looked like victory. But across the border, the Kremlin saw something else, a Western-backed coup, an attack on its influence. Moscow's interpretation of events differs dramatically. Putin does not see a popular revolution. He sees a Western plot. NATO expanding again. Russia's interests threatened. Ukraine slipping away. For Putin, the Maidan is not democracy. It is regime change, orchestrated by American and European intelligence. He watches the protests and sees CIA fingerprints. He watches Yanukovych flee and sees Russia's last ally in Kiev toppled. The new Ukrainian government is pro-Western. They speak of joining the European Union. Some even mention NATO. For Moscow, this is intolerable. Putin faces a choice. Accept Ukraine's westward turn or act. He chooses action. Not with diplomacy. Not with economic pressure. But with military force. Within days of Yanukovych's flight, Russian troops begin moving. Not toward Kiev. Toward Crimea. The operation is planned, precise, and swift. The world is about to learn that European borders can still be changed by force, and that old empires do not die quietly. In Crimea, armed men without insignia appeared overnight. They took control with silence and precision. Soon, the world knew they were Russian. Crimea, a peninsula jutting into the Black Sea, home to Russia's naval base in Sevastopol. Ethnically mixed but majority Russian-speaking. Transferred from Soviet Russia to Soviet Ukraine in 1954, when the difference seemed irrelevant. On February 27, 2014, just days after Yanukovych flees, armed men in unmarked uniforms seize key buildings in Crimea. They have sophisticated weapons, coordinated tactics, and no identification. People call them little green men. Russia denies they are Russian soldiers. They are local self-defense forces, Moscow claims. Nobody believes this. Their equipment, their discipline, their coordination, everything screams professional military. Within days, these forces control Crimea. Ukrainian military bases are surrounded. Ships blockaded in port. The Ukrainian government protests, but its military, already demoralized and confused after months of political chaos, does not fight back. The world watches in shock. This looks like an invasion. But Russia keeps denying it. The little green men were no flags. Technically, Russia is not involved. Later, Putin will admit the truth. Yes, they were Russian soldiers. Yes, it was planned. Yes, he personally gave the orders. But by then, Crimea is already lost. Moscow claimed Crimea through a rushed referendum. The world called it illegal. Russia called it destiny. A border was redrawn in bloodless conquest. On March 16, 2014, a referendum is held in Crimea. The question is not whether to join Russia, but which option for joining Russia to choose. Stay with Ukraine is not really an option. The referendum happens under military occupation. International observers are blocked. Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar populations, who oppose annexation, are intimidated. The official result: over 96% vote to join Russia. No credible international organization recognizes this referendum as legitimate. It violates Ukrainian law and international law. Borders cannot be changed by force. Territories cannot be annexed through fake votes held at gunpoint. But Moscow does not care. On March 18th, Putin gives a speech justifying the annexation. Crimea was always Russian, he argues. It was given to Ukraine by mistake. Now it returns home. He frames this as historical justice, as protecting Russian speakers, as standing up to Western bullying. The West condemns. Sanctions begin. Russia is expelled from the G8. But Crimea does not return to Ukraine. Putin's approval rating in Russia soars. He has stood up to the West. He has made Russia great again. For Ukraine, the message is terrifying. Russia can take your territory and face no military consequences. If Crimea today, what about tomorrow? In the east, rebels rose in Donetsk and Luhansk. Russia denied involvement, yet weapons, men, and money flowed across the border. The Donbass became a slow, endless war. The Kremlin does not stop with Crimea. In April 2014, separatist movements emerge in eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, collectively known as the Donbass. Pro-Russian militants seize government buildings. They declare people's republics. They call for independence or joining Russia. Are these genuine local uprisings? Some locals do support separation. But the evidence of Russian involvement is overwhelming. The separatist leaders are Russian citizens, often with military or intelligence backgrounds. Heavy weapons, tanks, artillery, anti-aircraft systems appear on the battlefield. No local rebellion could access such equipment. Russia denies everything. These are local volunteers, they claim. Any Russians involved are just volunteers on vacation. But intercepted communications, captured soldiers, and satellite imagery all tell the same story. Russia is waging war while pretending not to. Ukrainian forces launch an anti-terrorist operation to restore control. Fighting intensifies. Cities are shelled. Civilians flee. Donetsk airport becomes a symbol of resistance. Ukrainian soldiers hold it for months against overwhelming odds. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 is shot down over eastern Ukraine. All 298 people aboard die. Investigations conclude a Russian Buk missile system, operated by Russian-backed forces, fired the fatal shot. Russia denies responsibility. The dead include citizens from 11 countries. The tragedy shows how this conflict threatens more than just Ukraine. Ceasefires were signed, Minsk I, Minsk II. But each promise faded under artillery fire. The war froze, waiting for a spark to ignite again. As the war grinds on, international pressure builds for a ceasefire. In September 2014, the Minsk Protocol is signed. Ukraine, Russia, and separatist leaders agree to a ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weapons, prisoner exchanges, and eventually elections in separatist-held areas. The ceasefire collapses almost immediately. Fighting continues. In January 2015, separatists captured Donetsk airport after months of brutal combat. In February 2015, Minsk II is signed, a more detailed agreement brokered by Germany and France. Again, ceasefire. Again, withdrawal of weapons. Again, provisions for political settlement. Again, the agreement fails to bring peace. Violations occur daily. Artillery duels across the contact line. Snipers take shots. People die. Both sides blame each other. The war enters a strange state. Not quite frozen, but not escalating either. Trenches and fortifications appear. Soldiers on both sides dig in for what seems like a long wait. Villages sit on the contact line, half destroyed, their remaining residents living in constant fear. Between 2015 and 2021, Over 13,000 people die in this conflict. Millions are displaced. Eastern Ukraine becomes a landscape of destroyed homes and militarized zones. And every ceasefire violation is a reminder that the war never truly ended. It just paused. Between 2015 and 2021, the world looked elsewhere. But in the forests near the border, Russian forces trained, armed, and waited. For several years, the Ukraine conflict fades from international headlines. Syria dominates the news. Then Brexit. Then Trump. Then COVID. The Donbass war continues, but quietly. A few casualties each week. The world moves on. But Russia does not forget. Putin continues to speak about Ukraine as part of the Russian world. In July 2021, he publishes a long essay arguing that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, that Ukrainian independence is artificial, that Western powers manipulate Ukraine to weaken Russia. Through 2021, strange things happen near the border. Satellite images show Russian troops massing. Tens of thousands of soldiers. Tanks. Artillery. Field hospitals. Western intelligence agencies watch with growing alarm. Russia claims these are exercises. Nothing to worry about. But the scale is unprecedented. And the troops do not leave when the exercises end. In autumn 2021, the buildup intensifies. Over 100,000 troops near Ukraine's borders. Belarus, a Russian ally, hosts joint military drills. Equipment prepositioned. Blood supplies moved to field hospitals. Ukrainian officials warn the world. An invasion is coming. Some Western leaders listen. Others are skeptical. Surely Putin would not actually invade. The costs would be too high. It makes no sense. They are wrong. Late 2021. Moscow demanded guarantees that Ukraine would never join NATO. The West refused. Diplomacy crumbled. Tanks rolled toward the border. In December 2021, Russia presents demands. Ukraine must never join NATO. NATO must withdraw from Eastern Europe. Russia wants written guarantees. A new security architecture that gives Moscow veto power over its neighbors' choices. The West rejects these demands. NATO's door remains open. Countries have the right to choose their own alliances. Russia cannot dictate terms. Diplomatic talks continue through January and February 2022. Phone calls between Putin and Western leaders. Meetings in Geneva, Vienna, Brussels. Everyone searches for an off-ramp, a way to de-escalate. But Putin has already decided. The military buildup continues. Intelligence reports suggest invasion is imminent. American officials publicly warn that attack could come any day. Most people do not believe it. War in Europe. In the 21st century? It seems impossible. Surely this is just posturing. Putin wants concessions, not war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tries to calm panic while preparing for the worst. He calls Western warnings too alarmist. But behind closed doors, Ukraine mobilizes reserves and receives weapons shipments. On February 21st, Putin gives a bitter speech denying Ukraine's right to exist as an independent nation. He recognizes the separatist republics in Donbass. Russian troops enter openly, no longer pretending to be volunteers. 3 days later, the world changes. February 24, 2022. Before dawn, missiles lit the sky. The world woke to war. Ukraine was under attack from land, sea, and air. It begins in darkness. Cruise missiles strike military bases across Ukraine. Explosions in Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa. Air raid sirens wail. People wake to war. Russian forces cross the border from the north, east, and south. From Belarus, tanks drive toward Kiev. From Crimea, forces push north. From Russia proper, Columns advance into eastern Ukraine. Helicopters swoop toward Hostomel airport near Kiev. Paratroopers drop to seize key facilities. This is not a limited operation in Donbass. This is a full-scale invasion aiming to topple the Ukrainian government and install a puppet regime. Intelligence suggests Russia expects Kiev to fall within days. The world reacts with shock. This is the largest military operation in Europe since World War II. Live updates flood news channels. Images of explosions. Families hiding in subway stations. Traffic jams as people flee west. Zelensky refuses American offers to evacuate. "I need ammunition, not a ride," he says. He releases videos from Kiev proving he has not fled. His courage becomes a rallying point. Western leaders condemn the invasion. Emergency meetings. Swift and severe sanctions promised. But no military intervention. NATO will not fight Russia directly. Ukraine must defend itself. Many expect the invasion to succeed. Russia has overwhelming military superiority. Modern air force. Precision missiles. Experienced army. Ukraine's military, though improved since 2014, seems outmatched. The predictions are wrong. Russian forces raced toward Kiev. But they met resistance, fierce, unexpected, united. The capital did not fall. It became a symbol. Asterisk. The first days are chaos. Russian columns advance from multiple directions. Fighting erupts near Kiev. Hostomel airport changes hands multiple times. Russians try to establish an air bridge. Ukrainians fight desperately to prevent it. But the blitzkrieg fails. Russian logistics prove disastrous. Long columns of vehicles run out of fuel on highways, sitting ducks for Ukrainian ambushes. Soldiers seem confused about their mission. Some thought they were on exercises. Others believed Ukrainians would welcome them. Instead, they faced determined resistance. Ukrainian military, territorial defense forces, and ordinary citizens fight back. Molotov cocktails thrown at tanks. Roads destroyed. Bridges blown. Every village becomes an obstacle. Kiev refuses to fall. Air defenses shoot down Russian aircraft. Artillery defends approaches to the city. Massive traffic jams of Russian vehicles create perfect targets. Ukrainian drones, especially Turkish-made Bayraktars, destroy convoys. The world watches in disbelief and admiration. Ukraine is actually holding. David is fighting Goliath and not immediately losing. International support surges. Countries send weapons. Anti-tank missiles. Ammunition. Intelligence sharing. Sanctions on Russia tighten dramatically. Even traditionally neutral countries condemn the invasion. Within weeks, the Russian assault on Kiev stalls. Their advance stops. The 40-mile convoy threatening the capital breaks apart under constant harassment. Ukrainian forces launch counterattacks. By early April, Russia withdraws from northern Ukraine entirely. The battle for Kiev is over. Ukraine has won. The capital stands as a symbol of resistance that shocked the world. Months passed. Russia took ground in the south and east. Ukraine struck back in surprise offensives. Each city became a battlefield: Mariupol, Kherson, Bakhmut, asterisk. The war shifts. Unable to capture Kiev, Russia focuses on the south and east, securing a land bridge from Russia to Crimea, taking Donbass. More limited objectives, but still devastating. Mariupol becomes synonymous with horror. The southern port city is besieged. Russian and separatist forces surround it completely. Artillery pounds the city day and night. Civilians shelter in basements. Food and water run out. Hospitals are struck. Thousands die. Ukrainian defenders, including the Azov regiment, hold out for weeks in the massive Azovstal steel plant, underground tunnels, and Soviet-era fortifications. They refuse to surrender. Finally, In May, with no hope of relief, they surrender. Russia calls it liberation. The world calls it conquest through destruction. Russia captures Kherson, the only regional capital they take. But their occupation is brutal. Torture chambers discovered later. Civilians disappeared. But Ukrainians never stop resisting. Through summer 2022, grinding battles in Donbass. Russia slowly advances, taking village after village through massive artillery bombardment. Ukrainian forces inflict heavy casualties, but give ground. Then, in September, Ukraine strikes back. A surprise offensive in Kharkiv Oblast. Russian lines collapse. Ukraine recaptures 6,000 square kilometers in days. Towns liberated. Russian forces flee, leaving equipment behind. Ukraine's military demonstrates tactical sophistication that shocks Western observers. In November, Ukraine liberates Kherson. Russian forces withdraw across the Dnipro River. Ukrainians flood into the city, celebrating liberation. But Russia leaves destruction behind. Infrastructure demolished. Mines everywhere. The city of Bakhmut becomes the next focal point. Brutal urban combat. Wagner Group mercenaries attack relentlessly. Both sides suffer catastrophic casualties. The city is destroyed. In May 2023, Russia finally captures ruins that once held a city. The world punished Russia with sanctions unseen in decades. Banks froze. Companies fled. Yet the war machine kept moving, fed by pride and propaganda. Asterisk. The Western response is economic warfare. Within days of invasion, sanctions unprecedented in scope hit Russia. Major banks cut off from the SWIFT system. Assets frozen. Central bank reserves seized. Oil exports face restrictions. Technology embargoes. International companies flee. McDonald's, Starbucks, IKEA close operations. Luxury brands shut stores. Airlines stop flights. Russia is isolated like never before. The ruble initially crashes, but then stabilizes through capital controls. Russia pivots trade toward China, India, and other countries not joining sanctions. They find ways around restrictions. Black market oil sales. Shell companies. The economy suffers, but does not collapse. Most importantly, sanctions do not stop the war. Missiles keep flying. Tanks keep rolling. Putin's approval rating remains high. State media spins a narrative of Russia standing against Western imperialism. Many Russians believe they are the victims. The oligarchs, who Western leaders hoped might pressure Putin, prove powerless. Some speak against the war quietly. A few are found dead in mysterious circumstances. Most stay silent and accept losses. Sanctions work slowly if at all. They hurt the Russian economy. They limit military production long term. But they do not force withdrawal. The war continues. Millions fled Ukraine, mothers, children, elders. It became Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. Families split by survival. Asterisk. The human cost is staggering. Millions of Ukrainians flee. Mostly women, children, and elderly because men of fighting age cannot leave. They cross into Poland, Romania, Moldova, Slovakia, carrying suitcases and children, leaving behind homes, possessions, and husbands, not knowing if they will ever return, not knowing if their families will survive. Europe opens its arms. Unprecedented welcome. Poland alone takes in millions. Ordinary people house refugees. Countries waive visa requirements. Schools enroll Ukrainian children. The solidarity is real and moving. But trauma is deep. Families split. Children grow up in foreign countries. Women work low-wage jobs far from home. Video calls with husbands on the front line who might die tomorrow. The psychological scars will last generations. Millions more are internally displaced. They flee from east to west within Ukraine. From frontline regions to Lviv, to Kiev, wherever seems safer. They live with relatives, in temporary housing, always uncertain. This is genocide by displacement. Deliberate Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure aim to make Ukraine unlivable. Drive people out, empty the land, then claim it. But Ukrainian refugees are not victims who give up. They work. They organize support for those fighting. They advocate for their country internationally. They maintain culture and language. They remain Ukrainians in exile, waiting to go home. Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol. Places where civilian deaths shock the world. Proof that war spares no one, and truth dies among the ruins. Asterisk. When Russian forces withdraw from Kiev Oblast in April 2022, Ukrainian troops and journalists enter towns that were occupied. What they find is horror. In Bucha, bodies lie in the streets. Hands bound behind backs. Execution-style killings. Mass graves. Torture chambers in basements. Civilians shot while riding bicycles. Evidence of systematic atrocities. Photos and videos spread globally. The world is shocked. Forensic teams document evidence. Survivors tell stories of rape, torture, murder. Not combat casualties. Not accidents. Deliberate targeting of civilians. Russia denies everything. Claims the bodies were staged. Calls it fake news. But satellite imagery proves bodies were there during Russian occupation. Ballistics match Russian weapons. The evidence is overwhelming. Similar stories emerge from Irpin, Hostomel, Mariupol, and other occupied areas. Filtration camps where civilians are interrogated, tortured, deported to Russia. Mass graves. Destroyed hospitals and schools. Infrastructure deliberately targeted. This is not just war. It is war crimes. Crimes against humanity. International Criminal Court issues arrest warrant for Putin himself. Not that it stops anything, but it marks him as a wanted criminal. Every atrocity strengthens Ukrainian resolve. Surrender is not an option when surrender means torture and death. Every liberated village reveals new horrors, reminding the world why Ukraine must fight. Russia turned to energy as a weapon. Power plants destroyed. Ukraine shivered in darkness. Yet candles still flickered in defiance. Asterisk. As military victory proves elusive, Russia turns to terrorizing civilians. Starting in October 2022, waves of missile and drone strikes target Ukrainian power infrastructure. Power plants, substations, heating facilities, all hit repeatedly. Not military targets. Civilian infrastructure. The goal is clear: make Ukraine unlivable as winter approaches. Break morale through cold and darkness. Cities plunge into blackout. Millions without electricity. No heating in sub-zero temperatures. No water because pumping stations have no power. Hospitals operate on generators. Food spoils. Internet fails. The attacks intensify as winter deepens. Russia launches dozens of missiles in single attacks. Drones strike nightly. Ukrainian air defenses shoot down many, but not all. Repair crews work constantly, often under fire. One substation repaired, another destroyed. Yet Ukrainians adapt. Generators everywhere. Power banks charge when electricity briefly returns. Neighbors share resources. Candles and flashlights. People boil water on wood stoves. They endure. Coffee shops become charging stations. Buildings organize shifts for hot water. Communities support each other. Wartime solidarity replaces individual comfort. The strategy fails. Ukrainians do not break. They do not turn against their government. They do not beg for peace at any cost. Instead, each blackout strengthens resolve. Survival becomes resistance. Light becomes defiance. In 2023 and 2024, Ukraine struck back, reclaiming Kharkiv and Kherson. The world cheered, but the cost was heavy, and victory came slow. The Kharkiv counteroffensive in September 2022 showed what Ukraine could achieve. But replicating that success proves difficult. In spring 2023, Ukraine prepares a major counteroffensive in the south, hoping to cut the land bridge to Crimea. Western weapons arrive. Tanks, armored vehicles, advanced air defense systems, training for Ukrainian troops. Expectations rise. Some imagine a swift breakthrough. Reality is grinding. Russia has spent months building elaborate defenses. Multiple lines of trenches. Minefields stretching for kilometers. Dragon's teeth tank obstacles. Pre-sighted artillery. Drones everywhere monitoring every movement. Ukrainian forces advance slowly. Every field is mined. Every tree hides artillery observers. Losses mount. Villages are taken meter by meter. The offensive gains ground, but not the breakthrough hoped for. Western media grows impatient. Some question whether Ukraine can win. Military analysts note that modern defensive warfare, especially with drones and artillery, favors defenders. Breaking through requires resources Ukraine does not have, especially air superiority. Still, Ukraine fights. Robotyne. Verbove. Small villages most people never heard of become battlefields where men die for meters. Each advance is paid for in blood. Each position held requires constant reinforcement. By winter 2023, the offensive stalls. Gains made but limited. Neither side can achieve decisive breakthrough. The war settles into attritional struggle. Not stalemate because people keep dying. But no dramatic movements. Through 2024, the pattern continues. Ukraine holds its defensive lines. Occasionally counterattacks. Russia grinds forward in some sectors, especially around Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Progress measured in hundreds of meters over months. The cost is terrible. Casualties on both sides reach staggering numbers. Exact figures are state secrets, but estimates suggest hundreds of thousands killed and wounded. Entire units cycled through combat repeatedly. Exhaustion sets in. This is not just a war of bullets. It's a war of information, cyber attacks, propaganda, and truth twisted by every side. Modern warfare is digital. Before the first missile strikes, cyber attacks hit Ukrainian government websites. Banking systems disrupted. Communications targeted. Russian hackers, state-sponsored and mercenary, probe every vulnerability. But Ukraine's IT army fights back. Hackers worldwide volunteer. Russian systems attacked in return. Propaganda websites defaced. Databases leaked. The digital battlefield is as real as the physical one. More insidious is the information war. Russian state media pumps out narratives. Ukraine is run by Nazis. Russia is defending Russian speakers. The West provoked this war. Sanctions hurt Europe more than Russia. Victory is inevitable. Russian bots flood social media, amplifying division in Western countries. Questioning aid to Ukraine. Pushing conspiracy theories. Some gain traction. War fatigue grows in Europe and America. Ukraine fights this battle too. Zelensky's nightly video addresses maintain morale. Ukrainian social media shows Russian losses, Ukrainian victories, civilian suffering. The global audience stays engaged through constant content. But truth becomes complicated. Both sides exaggerate enemy losses and minimize their own. Propaganda mixes with legitimate information. Distinguishing fact from manipulation becomes exhausting. Outside observers must navigate this fog. Russian sources are state-controlled lies. Ukrainian sources are patriotic optimism. Independent verification is difficult when journalists cannot access front lines. Everyone claims truth. Few acknowledge uncertainty. The battlefield of perception matters. Western aid depends on public support. If populations believe Ukraine is losing or the war is hopeless, political support wavers. Russia counts on Western fatigue. Ukraine must constantly prove it can win. Cut off from the West, Russia turned inward, toward China, Iran, and its own past. The Kremlin called it resilience. Many called it regression. International isolation reshapes Russia. Cut off from Western technology, finance, and culture, the country pivots eastward. China becomes the crucial partner. Trade increases. Chinese goods replace Western products. Russian oil flows east at discounted prices. Iran supplies drones. Shahid kamikaze drones that strike Ukrainian cities. North Korea reportedly sends ammunition. Russia assembles an axis of sanctioned and authoritarian states. Internally, Russia tightens control. Remaining independent media shut down. Journalists flee or face arrest. Protests are crushed instantly. Laws against discrediting the military carry heavy sentences. Merely calling it a war, not a special military operation, can mean jail. Thousands of Russians leave. Brain drain of tech workers, professionals, intellectuals who oppose the war or fear the future. Entire industries lose talent. Russia's long-term prospects dim. The regime doubles down on nationalism. Victory Day parades grow more militant. Schools teach patriotic curriculum. State television presents a reality where Russia is winning, where sanctions backfire, where the West is collapsing. Some Russians believe it. Many stay silent, keeping doubts private. Opposition exists, but is fragmented and powerless. Navalny, Putin's main rival, dies in prison in mysterious circumstances. The message is clear. Dissent is dangerous. Russia resembles the Soviet Union more each day. Autarkic economy. Information control. Glorification of military power. The future traded for the illusion of past greatness. Ukraine, though scarred, found unity. Once divided by language and politics, it now stood together, East and West, speaking one word, survival. Before the war, Ukraine was divided. Russian speakers in the East. Ukrainian speakers in the West. Political parties splitting along regional lines. Arguments about history, about Europe, about Russia. The invasion changed everything. Russian tanks do not ask what language you speak before firing. Missiles strike Ukrainian and Russian-speaking cities equally. Death is the great unifier. Russian-speaking Kharkiv, bombed relentlessly, becomes fiercely Ukrainian. Odessa, culturally tied to Russia, rejects the invader. In occupied territories, even some who initially held pro-Russian views turn away when they experience Russian occupation. A Ukrainian national identity crystallizes through shared trauma. Not ethnic nationalism, but civic nationalism. Anyone who defends Ukraine is Ukrainian. Russian-speaking soldiers defend their country alongside Ukrainian-speaking ones. Language becomes less important than loyalty. Zelensky himself embodies this. A Russian-speaking Jew from eastern Ukraine, he becomes the symbol of Ukrainian resistance. His identity would have been divisive before. Now it represents unity. The war also reveals Ukraine's best qualities. Courage. Resilience. Ingenuity. Volunteers organize aid with impressive efficiency. Local communities support soldiers. People adapt to hardship without collapsing. The nation proves stronger than anyone imagined. Internationally, Ukraine's reputation transforms. Before, a corrupt post-Soviet country that most could not locate on a map. Now, defenders of democracy, embodying resistance to tyranny. The underdog winning hearts worldwide. This unity will not erase all divisions after the war. Political disagreements will return. But something fundamental changed. Ukraine forged a national consciousness in fire. Whatever comes next, that cannot be undone. By 2025, the front lines barely move. Towns are taken and retaken. Drones hum in the sky. The war has become a test of will, not speed. Asterisk. 3 years into war, the conflict settles into grim pattern. Neither side can achieve breakthrough. Neither side will surrender. The result is industrial-scale attrition. Drones dominate the battlefield. Small quadcopters with grenades. Larger loitering munitions. FPV racing drones converted to weapons. They are everywhere. Spotting, bombing, kamikaze strikes. Soldiers must hide from eyes in the sky. Artillery remains king. Both sides fire thousands of shells daily. Counter-battery fire. Creeping barrages. The front line is a moonscape of craters. Villages disappear into rubble. Forests become splintered stumps. Infantry assaults are suicidal without overwhelming support. Defensive positions are too strong. Minefields too dense. So both sides try to grind down the other. Hoping enemy exhaustion comes first. Hoping domestic support holds longer. Ukraine faces manpower challenges. The country is smaller. Population around 40 million before the war, millions fled. Every casualty is harder to replace. Mobilization expands. Men in their 40s and 50s drafted. The young and middle-aged are already fighting or dead. Russia has more people but not unlimited. Casualties are staggering. They recruit prisoners. Offer huge signing bonuses. Draw from ethnic minorities in poor regions disproportionately. Putin avoids mobilizing Moscow and St. Petersburg, knowing that would threaten his support. Both militaries adapt constantly. Tactics evolve. New weapons introduced. Electronic warfare intensifies. Innovation born from necessity. But neither finds the decisive advantage. The war becomes what neither side wanted. A long struggle where victory goes to whoever can endure longer. And endurance is measured in lives. Energy prices rise, food supplies shrink. Africa, Asia, and Europe all feel the tremors of a war fought thousands of miles away. Asterisk. Ukraine and Russia together account for massive shares of global grain exports. Wheat, corn, barley, sunflower oil, crucial for food security in Middle East, Africa, and Asia. The war disrupts everything. Ukrainian ports are blocked. Fields near fighting cannot be planted. Farmers conscripted. Supply chains broken. Global food prices spike. In wealthy countries, this means higher grocery bills. In poor countries, it means hunger. Egypt, Lebanon, Tunisia, countries dependent on Ukrainian and Russian grain face shortages. Food insecurity drives instability. Energy markets also convulse. Europe depended heavily on Russian natural gas. The war forces frantic diversification. Liquefied natural gas from America and Qatar. Coal plants reopened. Rationing considered. Energy prices soar, driving inflation. Russia weaponizes gas supplies, cutting flows through Nord Stream pipelines. Europe scrambles to fill storage before winter. The continent survives but at enormous cost. Industrial production falls. Household budgets squeezed. The war also reshapes geopolitics globally. Countries choose sides or try to stay neutral. China watches closely, drawing lessons about Taiwan. Iran, North Korea, and Russia deepen cooperation. Western alliances strengthen. Non-aligned countries tired of being pressured by both sides. Climate action slows. Countries burn more coal. Defense spending surges, environment spending cut. The war accelerates trends toward deglobalization and renewed great power competition. No corner of the world is untouched. A war in Eastern Europe reshapes how the planet eats, powers its homes, and thinks about security. Globalization reveals its fragility. Talks come and go. Deals proposed, broken, forgotten. Each side wants victory, but both crave rest. The question is no longer who wins, but who endures. Asterisk. Early in the war, negotiations seemed possible. Turkey and Israel offered mediation. Talks in Belarus, then Istanbul. Rumors of deals close to completion. They all fail. Russia demands Ukraine accept territorial losses, pledge neutrality, limit its military. Ukraine refuses to surrender sovereignty or abandon occupied citizens. The gaps are unbridgeable. By 2023, negotiations are rare. Both sides believe military solution is possible. Ukraine thinks it can push Russia back with enough Western aid. Russia thinks it can grind Ukraine down until Kiev accepts terms. But privately, both are exhausted. Ukrainian soldiers cycle through combat repeatedly, never enough rest. Russian casualties mount beyond what the public knows. Economies strain under war costs. Populations grow weary. Yet neither leadership can admit it. Zelensky would be betraying the dead to accept Russian territorial gains. Putin cannot survive admitting failure after committing so much. Both are trapped by their own rhetoric. Peace proposals circulate. China suggests plans. Brazil offers ideas. All founder on the same rocks. Ukraine will not cede territory. Russia will not withdraw without gains. Trust is zero. Any agreement would be violated. The war might end through exhaustion rather than victory. One side's collapse. Economic breakdown. Political change in Moscow or Kiev. Western aid fatigue forcing Ukraine to negotiate. But not through both sides reasonably compromising. So the war continues. Everyone knows it cannot last forever. No one knows how it ends. Now, as 2025 draws to a close, neither side has won. Russia holds land, but loses trust. Ukraine bleeds, but stands unbroken. The world has entered a new age, where old empires awaken, and freedom demands a price. Asterisk. Nearly 4 years of war. The maps show Russian control of roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory. Crimea, large parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, sections of Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Land paid for in blood. But what has Russia gained? Its military revealed as corrupt and incompetent. Its economy isolated. Its demographics worsening with casualties and immigration. Its reputation destroyed. Finland and Sweden joined NATO, exactly what Putin sought to prevent. Russia is weaker, not stronger. Ukraine has not won either. Millions displaced. Cities destroyed. Tens of thousands dead. Economy devastated. Recovery will take decades. The land occupied contains resources, and people Ukraine desperately needs. Victory is survival, but survival is not enough. The world changed. Europe rearmed. NATO revitalized. The assumption that major war was obsolete proved wrong. Democracies remembered they must be willing to fight for their values. Authoritarians noted that aggression brings costs, but not always defeat. This war demonstrated that nuclear weapons make great powers cautious, but not pacific. That international law is only as strong as willingness to enforce it. That the post-Cold War order is over. That we live in an era of renewed great power competition. For Ukraine, the lesson is bitter but clear. Freedom is not given. Security is not guaranteed. Alliances help but may not be enough. A nation must be willing to fight for itself, to endure unimaginable suffering, to sacrifice a generation for the possibility that the next might live in peace. The dead number in the hundreds of thousands. The wounded are more. Families broken. Children traumatized. Cities reduced to memory. And still the war continues. Still the artillery fires. Still the drones search for targets. And when the guns finally fall silent, history will ask, was this war the end of an empire, or the beginning of another? Asterisk. Russia launched this war to restore its empire, to prove that Ukraine belonged to Moscow, that borders could be redrawn by force, that the West was too weak to stop them. They have failed to conquer Ukraine. But have they failed entirely? They hold Ukrainian land. They have forced the world to negotiate with them despite their aggression. They have shown that violence can achieve partial goals even if total victory is impossible. If this war ends with Russia keeping Crimea and parts of Donbass, what message does that send? That aggression works. That if you are willing to accept costs, you can change borders. That might makes right if you have enough might. But if Ukraine, with Western support, eventually pushes Russia back and reclaims its territory, the message is different. Aggression fails. Democratic nations will support those who fight for freedom. Empires cannot be rebuilt through conquest. The truth likely lies between. Messy compromise. Territorial disputes frozen for decades. Neither side gets what it wants. Both claim victory. The war ends, but the conflict continues. What seems certain is this: the old Russian Empire is dying. The Soviet Union died in 1991. What Putin tried to rebuild is dying now. Russia will remain a country, a power perhaps, but the empire is finished. The subject peoples have escaped or are escaping. The fear that held it together is broken. Ukraine's victory is simply existing. Remaining Ukrainian. Refusing to be absorbed. Building a nation under fire. That nation may be scarred, diminished, exhausted. But it will be free. And that freedom, however costly, is the answer to 1,000 years of domination. When historians write about this war, they will note the tanks and missiles, the tactics and strategies. But the real story is simpler. A people decided they would rather die free than live on their knees. They made that choice not once, but every day for years. And in making that choice, they became truly a nation. Russia tried to erase Ukraine. Instead, Russia guaranteed Ukraine will endure. That is the real ending to this 1,000-year story. Not a military outcome. Not a peace treaty. But the transformation of a people into a nation that no empire can destroy. The guns will one day fall silent. The borders will be redrawn or frozen. Politicians will negotiate and compromise. But Ukraine will remain. Scarred, changed, but free. And that freedom, purchased with such terrible sacrifice, is something no empire can ever take away again.